All right, here they come.
Maggie, have people been let in yet? I didn't hear any. Usually I hear a noise.
Sorry, yes, everybody is in.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And hello, everyone, and welcome to the second day of our US EPA Brownfields grant writing strategies. Glad to have all of you with us. Hope you were able to join us yesterday, as our panel presentation will be a continuation of the grant narrative sections, but we will also have really good presentations on both the environmental justice screening tool by Lucy Stanfield from USC EPA Region 5, and also Tab Easy by Beth Grigsby of KSU Tab. My name's Amy Yersovich, and I am a KSU Tab partner. Next slide. Just covering some ground rules. If you do have any technical difficulties, please jot this number down so you can call them, or alternatively, you can email chsr@ksu.edu, and be aware that this presentation is being recorded and it will be available on the website that you registered on. And the link to that will be placed in the chat box. Next slide. So using Zoom Basics, if you look down at the bottom of your screen, you will have some of the Zoom tools there. On the far left, please make sure you are muted, and it'll be the red line hashed through the microphone will indicate that. Same with video. The number of participants is listed, and also your chat box, which you can use for asking questions to the presenters or to everyone if you want to make a comment or whatever. Next slide. Oh, and I apologize. One other thing with respect, you don't have to go back to the last slide, but if your name on the Zoom is not the name you registered with, please email chsr.ksu.edu so we can identify you and make sure you get a certificate of attendance. And this, along with Ohio EPA's wonderful help, this is also being brought to you by the Technical Assistance to Brownfields, in particular, the one operated out of Kansas State University. However, be aware that each region, and there are 10 of US EPA, does have a TAB provider, a Technical Assistance to Brownfield provider, and they assist with revitalizing communities through brownfields redevelopment by providing a number of services. And we'll talk about some of those today. And the key thing is those services are provided free of charge, and they're tailored to meet specific needs. We have some services that are often used, such as grant review prior to submitting your brownfields grant to US EPA, but there are a myriad of services we can provide, and all different types. So don't hesitate to contact KSU Tab to see if you can get help in a certain area. Next slide. And this is today's agenda. As I mentioned, we will have an EJ screening. They will also talk about the climate and environmental justice tool. And this will be done by Lucy Stanfield, who's a GIS specialist with Region 5. Beth Grigsby, as I mentioned, will talk about Tab EZ and how that can help you write your grant. And then we will have our panel presentation with Beth and myself, along with some panelists, some very good expert panelists that we'll introduce later. And then we'll move on to our group exercise, which today everyone will be in a group reviewing a particular grant and reviewing and scoring section 3. And then we will, I'll talk a little bit about writing a strong proposal, and then we will wrap up for the day. Next slide. So the panel, as I mentioned, we have some expert panelists today, and just to go over that, Carla Ocker, and unfortunately, Roxanne Anderson is ill and cannot attend today, but Dan Jolker from Ohio EPA will be on the panel, along with Jenny Carter-Cannell from Verdantis, who's had a lot of experience in grant writing. And I'm not sure, but Kim Kinlan may be able to join us from the Cuyahoga County Land Reutilization Corporation, who's had a wealth of experience writing grants. And then we'll go to the next slide. And as I mentioned, unfortunately, Roxanne cannot join us today, but we do have both Lisa and Dan Jolker, who will be able to provide us with a nice welcome and some information about some of the in-kind services, more or less, that can be provided by Ohio EPA Brownfield staff. And I will move this on to Lisa, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Amy. Again, yes, welcome back for day 2 of our workshop. We're so happy and excited about today's presentations and continuing our group exercise. We think they're really valuable resources for everybody. I really, again, just want to thank all of our partners. They do such an amazing job for us, helping us put this together for all of you. We really couldn't do this without their time and their expertise. So again, thank you to everyone who's helped us. And we at Ohio EPA really hope that we can be, your first stop in your brownfield journey, and continue to be a partner along the way. And there's no better person to, talk about our services and the other brownfield funding sources in Ohio than Dan. Dan is our lead brownfield coordinator and frankly, all around expert on this subject. And we couldn't have a better person on our team. So I'll just quickly pass it to him to get started on the next presentation for us this morning. So thank you all for being here, and take it away, Dan.
All right, thank you, Lisa. Today I'll talk mainly about our Targeted Brownfield Assessment Program. That basically is TBA for short. And so this presentation is part of a larger one where we do talk about the common brownfield sources in Ohio. But as I said, we'll just talk about TBA today. So let's go to the next slide. And so our TBA program has been around for a number of years, since around 2002. And so we have been providing these free services to communities based on funding that we get annually from the US EPA. And recently with the Bill Act, we are able to spend well over about $1 million a year doing assessments across Ohio. And as this slide indicates, sort of our goal and our mission is to promote brownfield redevelopments through free services. Next slide. And then assisting communities to transform their properties into economic and community assets. And that's kind of the summary of everything we've been talking about yesterday, and will continue today, is to provide these opportunities for gap funding to redevelop properties and transform properties. So next slide. There's a bunch of common tasks that we try to bunch these up into that happen at a site, and planning is, we talked a little bit about that yesterday, and that's sort of an underlying piece to brownfields, is to understand a perspective on how to redevelop that property from the neighborhood level and to the local and city level, and also planning just as a project, how to move a project through to completion. Assessments are an important piece that you need to determine if there is contamination, ultimately resulting in cleanup of that property, which often can be quite expensive depending on what you need to do, so that the property is ready for reuse. Next slide. There's a lot of types of funding, and today I'm speaking of free services, which is kind of unique. And so I'll get into more details about our TBA. There's grants, and that's kind of the focus of our workshop, is to apply for US EPA grants. There's also state grants. The Department of Development is flush with funding right now, and will be flush with funding for brownfield remediation and demolition. And there's also a gas station program. Loans, there's some of those are available through the Ohio Water Development Authority. And then there's various tax incentives, which we won't talk about today either. Next slide. So our TBA is for local governments and nonprofits, for brownfields. If there are residential properties, we can only work on properties that have 4 or more units, or apartment units is kind of the typical residential brownfield would be an apartment building with 4 or more units. The applicant cannot cause or contribute to the contamination. It cannot be under any federal orders. And these are questions that are in our application to get this information. We can assist you as you fill out our application. Next slide. The applicant does not need to own the property, but they have to have legal access, or the property owner needs to provide access. There's a template in our application to make that happen. Foreclosed and forfeited properties are eligible. We usually have the county auditor sign for legal access. And then occasionally the one-off site may have, if there's health and safety issues, we may use local law enforcement to assist with us. Next slide. Again, these are free services. We have contractors on board that complete the work. They will generate that report, and we will give it to the applicant at the end of the day. And so we have we can fund environmental assessments and planning. It's not a competitive. We take applications in year round. And again, local governments or nonprofits, and our applications online. Next slide. Briefly, phase 1 is used to identify known or suspected contamination. It's a non-intrusive, basically a paper research to find out the past uses of the property, with the goal of finding areas where releases of contaminants may have occurred at the property. We do a lot of our TBA assessments are phase 1s for property transactions to kind of boost or help move properties that need that ASTM, or all appropriate inquiry phase 1, to help it through a purchase process. And we can also do a VAP phase 1, especially if it's moving into more of a cleanup program. So it'll meet some of our, we'll meet the specifics of the VAP program. Next slide. We do phase 2 is sampling, where you sample soil, groundwater, sediment, or vapor. There's a picture of a geoprobe, the tool that's used to collect these samples typically. Historically, we limited our scopes, but we've been doing a few more VAP quality phase 2s at some projects to help them leverage cleanup dollars. Next slide. Asbestos surveys, we do a lot of these, especially if it's renovation or pre-demolition. We use licensed inspectors to assess what amount of asbestos materials are in a building and try to wrap our head around the costs of removing the asbestos as a future remedy cost. Next slide. Our typical timeframes, we're quite busy right now. We typically can complete a project in about 3 to 6 months. If we're doing multiple pieces of phase 1 and a phase 2 together, we're probably pushing about 4 to 6 months to go through that process. And we can do remedial plans and geophysical surveys. I didn't mention that either. We do geophysical surveys especially at old gas station sites, to prepare them for the gas station program, to look for any orphan tanks or to confirm the presence of tanks at those properties. Next slide. We provide free technical assistance to brownfields, so people can call us or we'll have meetings, and we do workshops like the one today. And throughout the year, we have other training. And we do we have discussions with other programs, brownfield assistance programs across the state. And we can offer specific assistance through our VAP program for document reviews. And so any projects in the VAP, a local community can request free technical assistance for review of documents and to assist a project that is going through the voluntary action program. Next slide. And I briefly touched on a collaboration. We have discussions with other organizations, the Jobs Ohio, Department of Development. So we're in close relationship with them, and we collaborate with communities. If you have questions about a project or want to bounce some ideas, we're more than happy to talk about them and find those opportunities for assistance. Next slide. Here's our contact information. There's some links to our TBA application and our outreach. Next slide. And if you want to be on our listserv to get email updates, there's a QR code here you can scan, and we will gladly keep you informed of any future workshops and activities. And I guess I can have a plug for the National Brownfield Conference is in Detroit. I don't know if they're still open to accepting attendees there, but a bunch of us will be attending the conference in Detroit in 2 weeks. So with that, I think that's all I have.
Okay, we are going to move on to Lucy Stanfield, who's, as in the past, will be giving us a really good demonstration and explanation of EG Screen and a little bit of CGEST. So I'll let you take that away, Lucy.
Great, thank you, Amy. Good morning, everyone. I'm Lucy Stanfield from EPA in Chicago, and I'm going to start out with some questions in the chat. I just want to get a sense from we have 28 folks on the call from Ohio, and I'm just interested in knowing if any of you have used EPA's EJ Screen tool in the past few years, or you're just hearing about it now. If you can type in the chat, that'll give me a good sense of what to cover in depth. But please, yeah, just take a second there to see people's response. Got some yeses, some nos, which is what I expected, but that's great. So I'm going to put the 2 links to the mapping tools I'm going to be talking about in the next 20 or so minutes. I'm going to leave time for questions, but please follow along, and I'm happy to, we'll definitely stop with some time for questions, and I'm going to turn off my video and share my screen.
Hey, Lucy, I just wanted to let you know you have plenty of time. Take your time, don't rush. I think it's really important for our grant writers to hear what you have to offer. So thank you.
Sure, yeah, and please give me if I'm not being mindful of time, let me know, Beth. Okay, so as it's mentioned on the agenda, gathering, interpreting data to strengthen your grant application, and specifically these two tools. So we're gonna click here. Great, and I am not, I work with Brownfields staff in my office, the Region 5 staff. I am not part of the application review process, but I wanted to dig into at least one of those applications. I looked online, and what are you as applicants here on the call? Why are we talking about these tools? Because the applications ask for describing your community, specifically census tracts. It may not be your whole community, your whole city, might just be a portion of it, or a neighborhood, or a collection of neighborhoods. And what those applications are asking for are community descriptions, not only the demographics, population, income, statistics, but also discuss how your project will help facilitate either identifying or reducing those threats to human health, environment. And so you're wondering, your community's the best, but these tools are here to help you also provide some data in your application to make it that much stronger. As I mentioned, I'm going to cover both of those tools. But let's focus on EJ Screen first. This is EPA's web-based GIS tool for nationally consistent EJ screening and mapping. And again, this is a screening level tool. This is not this doesn't put a stamp on your community. You are an EJ community. You are now identified as such in all federal and state government applications and grant programs, but it is a screening tool. There is a lot of data. There's modeling that's going on here. And again, the point is collecting nationwide, nationally consistent data that can be comparable, or that can be consistent. And there are several states around the country that have their own EJ tools. This is EPA's. We're now at version 2.2. It's been several years. This tool has been out, and we've been refining it and also looking at what are the other types of data that other mapping tools are using. But EPA's tool combines environmental and demographic data in order to highlight where vulnerable populations may be disproportionately impacted by pollution. And as I mentioned, it's a starting point, whether here at the EPA, our internal prioritization and targeting of resources and enforcement efforts and such, but it's also a public tool. So we want all of you to be able to pull out information on your communities. There are some limitations to the tool. As I mentioned, it doesn't cover all environmental issues, all known environmental justice issues. It does not at this time assess cumulative risk, in terms of giving a number, a score for your community has this amount of cumulative risk relative to others. Environmental indicators are mostly screening level. The indicators vary because, again, this is national data. Some of it doesn't come out on an annual basis, but it is using the most up-to-date versions of those data. It's also pulling in and using census data. And we know those limitations with using census data that can obscure small communities, rural communities in particular, small populations. And so we're aware of that. And the results should be verified on the ground. That's where you come in. This is one piece of your application. This is certainly not the only way you describe your community in your applications. And as I mentioned, it's not a label of an EJ community that then has some kind of status. It is just a screening tool. So let's move on. Key features, there are EJ indexes, we call them, and they are one for each environmental indicator. You can see those on the right. We've got several air indicators, air-based indicators, particulate matter. If you have been looking at a fire and smoke map, maybe airnow.gov purpleair.com in the last month or so with the Canadian wildfires. Particulate matter has definitely been on your mind, or definitely in the news more. And that's the amount of soot, the amount of particles in the air, and PM 2.5 is measuring certain size of particle. We've also got ozone, diesel particulate matter, several air toxics indicators, traffic proximity, proximity to highways, interstates is also an indicator, lead paint incidents, proximity to Superfund sites, proximity to risk management plan sites, those are chemical factories, proximity to hazardous waste sites, wastewater discharge, and the number of underground storage tanks. Those are the 13 environmental indicators that are combined with demographics to make the indexes. And we'll look at some of those as we go through an example in just a minute. But the other data are annually updated environmental data when possible, annually updated demographics from the census. We're not waiting for every 10-year census. The census publishes the American Community Survey every year, and that's a 5-year estimate. So we have the most up to date, the latest version of that in the tool, and that's been just recently updated at the beginning of this month with version 2.2 of this tool. And it's the highest resolution data available. You're able to download this data, which is great. A lot of these tools, they look great online. You can look at them, and then you're wondering, how do I get this information out? So we'll talk about that. And the team at headquarters really worked on accessibility, making this easy to use while providing you with a lot of different data to look at. So just as I mentioned at the beginning of July, version 2.2 of this tool came out and added a 13th indicator, an EJ index for toxic releases to air. And that's a measure from our toxic release inventory, if you're familiar with that data set. The census data and the environmental indicators were also updated, as I mentioned. The latest Census American Community Survey data, and that's a 5-year estimate from 2017 to 2021. And then the data is collected through 2021, and it takes a year or so to then publish that data. So that's, we're in 2023. You're probably wondering, why don't I see the data up to this year? Because it's still being collected. And then I would say the biggest change in this latest version, like I said, that came out in the end of June, early July this year, is the standard report. You used to be able to print a 2-page report. That's been reformatted into a community report with infographics and a better look and feel. So we'll go through that in just a minute. Just a note about these data sets, it's hard in 15 minutes, 30 minutes to run through everything and to make sure everyone understands, what are these data? What are they talking about? What is the source of that data? That is all online for you if you want to dig in, if you have questions about these indexes. How are they created? Again, the index is combining not only the environmental indicator, but the demographics at the block group level, the census block group level. So if you're familiar with census tracts, those are made up of block groups, which are even smaller, finer resolution. The data set also includes supplemental indexes, and those are indexes. The primary difference between supplemental and the main EJ index is that the people of color data set is not included in the supplemental index. So it's a different way to look at your area, particularly if you do not have a high population of people of color. So that's an additional data set. In addition to health, climate, and critical service gaps are things like health access and broadband access. So these are just all the different ways you can pull this data to describe your community in the best way possible. And as I mentioned, these are the socioeconomic indicators, people of color, low income, unemployment, linguistic isolation, households where they speak English less than well. This is very good for outreach efforts. EPA specifically looks at that data coming from the census. Less than high school education, the young population, the very old population, and the demographic index, which is the low income population plus the people of color population divided by 2. So let's click through. Our environmental indicators, I read off of those at the beginning, and you can see the different years of the publication. How is that data collected? And again, these are nationally collected data sets that we have data available for, but these are the first half of those environmental indicators. And looking at these for your community, not every indicator is going to be a high incidence or a high percentile, as we'll get to, but knowing which ones are and to be able to describe your community is the point of this data set. Let's get to what is the index talking about, and it helps identify areas that may have higher pollution burdens and vulnerable populations present at the same time. And all it's doing, it's taking each environmental indicator, multiplying it by the demographic index and the block group population to give that index number. And these results are ranked as percentiles, which you'll see in the tool, not only percentiles at the national level. How does your community's one block group compare to the entire rest of the country? That's the USA percentile. And that, how it's looking at how to, it's not comparing risks, saying your community's ozone level is comparable to this community across the country's ozone level. The risks are not comparable, but it is an effort to be able to compare across state or nationwide, all of these factors. So it isn't still getting to the actual risk, but it is making it comparable on all of these indicators and the demographics kind of in a single effort here. And if you're looking at these bar charts and you're seeing for this particular, I have the city of Piqua, Ohio here. We're going to be looking specifically at that city for one of our demos. And you can see the different percentiles and a place at the 80th percentile, or I can see, yeah, there's definitely maybe the PM particulate matter indicator indicator is over 75% on the bar chart here. So let's say it's 80, a place at the 80th percentile, and this is the national percentile, means that 20% of the country's population has a higher value. So it's helpful, and EPA has used as a general baseline, are any of these indexes over the 80th percentile, that putting this particular location, any particular location you're looking at, in that highest grouping for high pollution burden and vulnerable populations. So that's a lot of indicators and a lot of data that I'm talking about. I'm going to move here in a second to the demo. And I just want to mention, as a lot of data here, you can view the data on the browser. All you need is a Google Chrome browser is the best browser. Internet Explorer is not going to be able to function with everything that this tool requires. So we do recommend the Chrome browser, but you can view and download a community report, which gives you all of the indicators at once for a single location. And that could be a city, that could be one census tract, that could be up to 5 census tracts you select. It could be a point with a buffer around it for a 2-mile buffer around the area. And I'll show you that. And the map in the browser, in the tool, gives you one indicator at a time and lets you go through there. So let's go out to Google Chrome, and please put your questions in the chat, because I'm going to definitely make time for that. And I'm just gonna start off. Here is the EJ Screen tool. And if you look over here, as I've mentioned, you've got all the environmental justice indexes. You can click on that and you can click on a particular index and it will show. I'm at a very large scale, but I just wanted to go through these, the supplemental indexes, as I mentioned. That is the same index, but without, it's using not just people of color and low income, it's using 5 different demographic indicators, but does not include the people of color population in that index. Pollution and sources, again, you're able to look at, where is just the actual indicator of pollution. Socioeconomic are here. And like I said, this is allowing you to, here's health data. We've got some health data that's coming from the CDC. There's climate change data. At a minimum, we're talking about flood risk. This is certainly not the whole universe of climate change related data, but some things, critical service gaps. And this can be important in your community, whether it's a urban or rural community. These are, again, ways to describe your community. And then there are ways to get additional demographics right here in the EJ tool and this threshold map. And so let's go right to Piqua. I'm going to type in Piqua, Ohio, and we're going to zoom in for our demo today. And like I said, we could click on any myriad of those data sets that I just showed. I'm going to go here to this threshold map though, because I want kind of an overall picture. I've talked about a lot of data sets, the environmental data. There are 13 of these indicators. I want to know the EJ indexes compared to every place in Ohio. So compare to state. I'm going to keep that as the suggested 80th percentile and higher. And it's saying select the number of indexes, and this is going to select at least one of the indexes is over 80. So I don't know Piqua, Ohio, the folks on the call from Piqua, you know your community, but you may not know all of these different indicators, what's going to show up. So this is this threshold map button at the bottom here. Click add to map, and it's going to show me the census tracts for this area. And if I zoom out, it'll have all the data everywhere, but we are zoomed in on Piqua, so we want to focus on that. And these are the census block groups. I'm sorry, I said tract before. This is smaller than a census tract. So the block groups that are at or above the 80th percentile for at least one of those indicators. And if I've just clicked on one, kind of the south of downtown, and it shows me all of the percentiles right here. And we can see several are over 80. The lead paint EJ index here says lead paint 86 percentile. And right here at my fingertips, if this was the census block group I was interested in, my Brownfields application is going to focus on a property here. I can click right here, select this, click generate report. And it's going to say, which report would you like? And we're looking at first this EJ Screen Community Report. And I can say Piqua, Ohio, census block group. And I'm going to click EJ Screen Community Report, and we're just going to get right to it. We have our area focus, we know it, and we want this report. And you can see it didn't take too long, just a few seconds. It's usually pretty fast. And right here is the print, and you can print to a PDF. But look at this. This is giving us the specific block group. Again, if your address is in there, you can use the search bar to type in your address. But it's showing you all that information. Here are the demographic indicators. Low income percentage for this block group, 68%, going through all of this. Average life expectancy, 75 years, income, breakdown by race, languages spoken, breakdown by age, limited English. Scrolling down this report, it's going to print out everything in one location. It's a 4-page report. So it's very handy. I encourage all of you, if you do nothing else with this tool, at least get your community of interest. It could be a block group. It could be a neighborhood. It could be a 1-mile area. If you typed in Cleveland and clicked generate report, it's going to have a tough time doing that. So certainly the larger cities, it's in your interest to identify and narrow down the areas. But yeah, just scrolling down, it gives you not only the state percentile, but the indexes, as I mentioned. The actual data here is the table of values, and it gives you that percentile. You know, how does your community compare to the rest of Ohio? And that's where I would mention and say focus on that. The nationwide comparison is helpful, but I think really, you know, how does your community compare to the rest of the state is really valuable. And so that is the whole report that you get for any of those. Just want to check, how am I doing on time?
Hey, Lucy, you're doing great on time. Got a couple questions already, if you don't mind. I think pretty much on this section.
Sure.
If you want tabular data, can we get it from that report too?
Yes, part of this report is, yeah, this is right here. You know, you can copy paste this right into Excel. This is the tabular data, and it's going to be saved to a PDF, which we know is not, you know, that's, you want to pull that into Excel, but you could easily copy and select this table and to paste into Excel or another spreadsheet version. Yeah.
Do you can you show for this city what's covered under additional demographics?
Yes.
Just out of curiosity.
Oh yeah. Yep. I mentioned that. So close this threshold map. Delete just means we're going to unselect it. Yeah, additional demographics is great because it's going to give you a quick report. And let's stick with the most recent census data and not go back to 2010. So under population, you can get specifics, a block group map. It's going to add that to the map. But it pulls out all of that. If you're looking specifically for population, let's go to like income, for example. It can give you very detailed information. Yeah, household income less than 15,000. It's some of the detail on the demographics, you know, beyond those main, you know, low income indicator that are available in the EJ screen tool, but you can see very detailed, yeah, per capita income. Let's go ahead and just add that to the map. See what happens and zoom out. Yeah, and over here is where the legend is. And so for any of these maps, you know, if you do get the data, if you're looking at it, another great tool is besides being able, I didn't even go through these tabs, the places, there's so much other data you can add here, from EPA regulated facilities to hospitals, tribal lands, public housing. Even the White House tool here is that's what Justice 40 is talking about. And then there are other ways to select, but you can do a screenshot of any of this data if it's going to help you, if those demographics, for example, are of interest. But I'm going to take those off here. How am I doing on time, Beth?
Oh, you're doing just fine. Just keep going.
Okay.
I'd say, let's say 15 minutes.
Okay, great. I wanted to go back to my slides and Yeah, I've gone through some of these screenshots. You can add those regulated facilities. Looking at Pequa, there was a high EJ index of proximity to Superfund sites. And here are the locations of those. So you can add those to get that fuller sense of, what are these indexes talking about? What are they referring to? This is the example showing you can select if your city's not too large, like you definitely would not do this with Cleveland or Columbus, but you could select the whole city using the report tab, which is this third little button here to select a city. You can also select just a block group like I did. You can drop a pin, you can draw along a river if you want, add a path. You can draw a line segment and search 1 mile around that. If that is your area that you are applying for, or it's a group of neighborhoods. And then we've covered the map. The tools and this fourth button, I do want to show, you have the opportunity to save your session. So you've spent some time, you've maybe spent half an hour in this tool, but it's lunchtime, you've got to go. You'll come back later. There is a save session button, which is great. And there's several other tools that lets you add data, add shapefile, for example, here. I do want to just quickly show, there are online trainings that go in depth that give you an hour training. These are on the website, epa.gov/EJ-screen under the office hours. There is another live office hours happening August 16th. But all of the live training webinars to date have been recorded and are online. And this is the resources, as I mentioned, the metadata, the technical information about the data, guidance documents, definitions of all the data are on this website. But I do want to get to just very quickly the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. This is also called by an acronym CGIST, but it is the White House Council on Environmental Qualities tool as part of the Justice 40 initiative. And this is a separate tool that identifies disadvantaged communities that are either marginalized, underserved, or overburdened by pollution. And as you can see, it's going beyond what EJ-screen is looking at. It's adding other categories of information. And the main difference is this is the census tract level, all of this data. So I am going to show, this is what the tool looks like. Let's go out and actually look at the tools page. This is it, the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. This is the White House's screening tool. Again, it's called Climate and Economic Justice. So the data is going into climate change data, health data, additional data sets that the EPA tool is not focusing on. And we've zoomed in and it's showing me these shaded areas. These are the areas that they have identified as disadvantaged. And it's saying, yes, I've clicked on this one census tract, kind of squiggly looking. Census tracts are larger, as I mentioned, than the block groups. But let's just look over here on the right. And it's saying, here's the tract information. Is this identified as disadvantaged? And it's saying yes, because it meets these thresholds. And then here in the dark blue is where it's saying it meets the thresholds. And you can see here for housing costs, it's giving you this kind of data. This is different than the EJ-screen data, which is focused more on environmental and pollution burdens. But things like, lack of green space, the lead paint, that is a similar indicator in both tools. So it's in the 98th percentile for lead paint. And you can see all of the other data sets. It is in those, because they were not highlighted in blue right here, they are not, it's not the reason why the census tract is listed as disadvantaged, but it does give you all of that if you expand each of those. The one thing this tool, I hope they will do in their next versions as they create them and update this, there is no report button. You know, you're looking, how do I get this data out? And unfortunately, it allows you to search for that data. It does not let you get all of the data for a single census tract out in a single PDF or page. So at this time, it is limited to screenshots. And you could say, yeah, that's a limitation, because we all, once you see a report, you want the report. So I'll stop there and see if there's any questions. I know I've got about 5 minutes or so. I'm happy to take any questions, or we can look at a different area.
Would anyone like to nominate their city or area for Lucy to demonstrate?
Yes, I would.
All right,
I'm in Hamilton, Ohio. The zip is 45011. Thank you.
All right, so if we've just come into EJ's screen, like I mentioned, very first tab, I would go right to the threshold map, and let's see the EJ indexes that compared to the state of Ohio. And we're going to just keep this at 1 to show which indexes are, you know, at least one index for those block groups. And you can see there's quite a bit of the city, the block groups. You can see the ones that are shaded in green are the ones that are showing the at least one of those indices over 80. So I've clicked on one. Is there a particular address or part of Hamilton you want to
Yes,
focus?
actually, the focus is on the Riverview community, which is an address that you can put in is 545 South Front Street.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to zoom back out. And it's showing this a very light gray, but I've selected, yeah, the block group around that. And just to see the percentiles for the state, compared to the state, those percentiles are all above 90. So if we wanted just the report for just this block group, we would click generate report. But maybe, you know, maybe these are multiple areas that you are interested in. And how would we look at that data? Going to click here to reports, and we could pick one of these. We could pick the whole city, one block group. I'm going to go here to select multiple, and I'm going to click not only that block group we were interested in, but I'm going to click a few of those adjacent to it, because maybe your development or your application is going to look at all of these. Just wanted to show you that, how you can pull that information. It's going to take a second here. Here we go. And here it's saying, what do you want to name this? And you said that was Riverview area. I'm going to type
Yes.
Hamilton, Ohio. You just always want to give it a name. You know, what is that area you were looking at? I'm going to click community report, and let's hope it's about 4 or 5 seconds here to load the report. And here it is. And it's saying you selected 3 block groups. Here is that population, the area. Here's everything in that community report. Again, it's a 4-page report. Not only some baseline statistics, but the EJ indexes for every single one of those, all 13. The state percentiles are in blue. National percentiles are in green. Comparing supplemental indexes. And then here's the table. And it's all right there. And as we mentioned, you can just copy and paste this. I'm going to open Excel and oops, and paste. And I just copied a little sliver of it, but this is the data that then you can work to add into your application right here.
We have another question as well.
Sure.
They would like you to demonstrate a county. So I'm not sure, I haven't been, I've not been given the name of the county. So we'll just have to pick one, I guess.
Yeah, I can select the county right here around
Sure.
Hamilton. The county, I guess I have not actually searched on a county for, if I click report, I wonder if it's going to give me the whole report, because that would be quite a bit of data. I'm trying to think what
Sure.
use case.
Do you think CGEST would be a better tool for a county?
CGIS will definitely show you, it's only going to show you the census tract information. It's not going to give you a overall.
Okay.
Let me just type in Hamilton, just so we're looking here. That's the city, of course, not the county.
Hamilton
you
is
can-
Butler County.
Yeah, you can zoom out on this map to get a sense of what are the disadvantaged communities as census tracts.
Yeah.
And if you know your county boundaries, offhand, I don't know them for this area, but it's not going to give you a county level statistics for everything over here. Again, those are just at the tract level. Let me show you an EJ screen, and I know, yeah, I'm about at my time. Under places, as I mentioned, Justice 40, EJ screen has added in the Justice 40 data. So just if you're like, these are great tools, they're different, I have to go to 2 places now. Well, you can actually add in those disadvantaged communities as shaded here in the blue, and you can bring them right into the map. Here is a generate report. All right, let's do that. Butler County for this tract. We click generate report. It is still going to generate the EJ screen community report that gives you all of the EJ screen data. But if you're wanting to know, how is this for Hamilton, Ohio, maybe looking more broadly at the whole county, how does it compare? How many disadvantaged tracts are in the city of Hamilton? That is information you can get by looking at this. But yeah, there's a lot of different ways to look at this data. I encourage you to look at the additional videos and training, as I mentioned. And I did have in my presentation our EJ coordinator, Kathy Triantafilou, who is our Region 5 staff person, who is most expert at this tool. So I encourage you to contact her with more questions, and thank you.
That's really great, Lucy. If you could in the chat, put Kathy's email in there as well. I gave them your email. I don't see any other questions, so I think I should probably move on, but I think it's important to you as grant writers or even reviewing your grants. If you are working with an engineer or something, where's their data coming from? And as Carla mentioned yesterday, EJ Screen and CGEST are very important. So let's take it away with Tab Easy, and I'll get us back here on time, so I may move fast. Let's see. I've got to look and see what time it is. So sorry. Okay. Well, my name is Beth Grigsby. I'm the Region 5. I coordinate services for Region 5 for TAB services. So we have various partners. We have folks that we bring in, like Amy Yursevich. She's our state point of contact. So I coordinate and help coordinate those services, and I'm involved in projects as well. back when I was with the TAB program and I was the Region 5 coordinator with Purdue University. And one thing that I found very difficult was wading through the grant guidelines. I found that to be something that was overwhelming. I felt like I needed an attorney on one hand and a consultant on the other. I couldn't even get through it. So our engineers at Purdue started the Tab Easy tool. And then when Purdue gave up that particular outreach program, Kansas State took it over, which was awesome because they've totally improved it and done so many things for it. Next slide, please. So like I said, I feel your pain. So for me, this is a great way to organize your grant. You can use all the bells and whistles. All I'm doing today is hopefully just getting you started. It's very user-friendly. There's helpful hints for many sections, lots of resources. Check out those resources. You can find successful grant applications, probably for the last 8 years. You can find your reference to your EPA grant guidelines. You can find a lot of information. Multiple entities can work together on the proposal. I'm not going into that today, but you can have your team work together. You can even give them edit capability. There's ways to do that with this. All proposals are password protected, so this information doesn't go anywhere. And the framework is prescribed by the EPA grant guidelines. The proposal text that you put into this, it can be exported as a Word document. And we'll talk about that a little bit. First thing you have to do, though, when you log in, you go to Tab Easy, and here's the website, register if you're a first-time user. We don't use that information for any purposes except to maybe let you know about events that are coming up. And if you have a current Tab Easy ID and password, it'll work for this. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is the main. So this is my grant applications, and this you can see I've done some of my own, and I named most of them after my grandkids, but this kind of if you are starting, you won't have this, but you will have that start a new grant application, which is the way you get it going. And so how do you start? You push that button. Again, those are sample grant applications I'm pointing out there. If you want to take a look at those, it's really good to see how some folks frame certain concepts in their grant applications. So I've always found it very helpful to see examples. Next slide, please. So this screen shows with the My Grant applications, you really have to start by creating the application and configuring it. So this is the first step to configuring it. So for this particular scenario, I'm doing the Coalition Assessment Grant, and it's called Ben and Jerry. Next slide, please. And always save. Don't be crazy. Save your data or it won't be saved. So the application configuration now will be updated to reflect, now this is for last year, funding year 23 Coalition Assessment Grant. And there's some more examples here. If you take a look here, if you have the blue font is typically a lot of the resources. So last year we had the guidelines on the website. We had the guideline facts. We have the appendix for grants.gov. There's lots of things here. If you see something in red on the screen, it's typically an alert, like guidelines might have been revised somewhat, or dates that you have to submit. So always save as you go. Next slide, please. So once configured, and here, this is part of that configuration, and it's going to help you because it's actually going to automatically put some text into your grant. And let's say you're asking for I don't know how much, $1 million there. You're a county. You don't have, you answer questions, you do drop downs, you save that configuration. Next slide, please. This just shows you going in. So if you look to the left here, the purple strip, these are all the pieces of the grant that you can do within this tool. The narrative information sheet, the narrative criteria, which I'll focus on more because that's more about the ranking, and the threshold. Next slide, please. So this is why I feel like it's a very valuable tool. As you notice, depending on the grant you're selecting, you even have different threshold criteria that you need to follow. And this is a lot easier many times when you're trying to figure out what grant you really want to go after, taking a look at that threshold to make sure you meet the requirements. Next slide, please. And then we get into the narrative ranking criteria. Now, one thing I neglected to put on the slide was if you look to the left again, you'll see I've done the pull down where I have project area description and plans for revitalization. It has the sections and subsections here. Those little white circles, as you fill out the text, they will either, if you save, they will be halfway shaded in, or if you, there's another term, and then if you save and it's final, it'll fill the whole circle in, so you know where you've been in the grant application, because many times you start and you stop, you start and you stop. And again, this is something you do on a website. You do it at your leisure, if this is called leisure. And you just work on it. Next slide, please. So again, this is just a comparison of ranking criterias between just community-wide and coalition assessment grants. So if you take a look at this, you'll see there's a big difference. So that's a good way to evaluate what you're doing, where you're going, and have a feel for what you're getting into. Next slide, please. And so on this one, so I've done the drop down where I'm going to fill in overview of brownfield challenges and description of target areas. So take a look at this. This kind of lays it out for you. It gives you the criteria, and then it gives you the evaluation criteria all there. So you're not flipping back and forth between sections 3 and 5 or whatever in the grant proposal. You have it right there. And then we have helpful hints. Next slide, please. So this is just a blow up of the helpful hints that we have for that section. It really helps. I mean, even seasoned grant writers, and after I left Purdue, I went into consulting. Oh, that was a move. But anyway, I went into consulting. I did quite a bit of grant writing. So this is very helpful for reminders, and they're all updated with the guidelines every year. Next slide, please. So then you can, as you fill in the text, you can export it. There's a tab where you can export to Word and print out your draft copy for review. And one thing I always do right at the very beginning, I export to Word and just look at the outline. What am I doing? What am I in for? Where am I going? Next slide, please. And guess what? That's the end, but it was more of an intro. If you have any questions, please get a hold of me or get a hold of Maggie, our assistant director. She's a real pro at this. We won't have the newest guidelines set up until the guidelines are announced, but this gives you a good feel for what you're getting into. And so now we're going to start with the panel presentation, unless there are any questions, but I'm sure somebody will let me know if there are. And so we're going to be walking through section 3 and 4 of the grant narrative. They're very important. And I have to admit, even as a seasoned grant writer, I get kind of tired by the time I get to sections 3 and 4, but they're very important because one point can make the difference between you having a winning application and having to try again next year. Next slide, please. So I'll be talking about task descriptions, cost estimates, and measuring progress. Next slide. And here we go. This is what it's about. You're going to be talking about what you're doing, what are the activities, how are you going to implement, what's the schedule, who's leading, be specific on that, what are the outputs. So this is all part of what you'll need. And note, when you look at the guidelines, at least I did for, I believe this was for coalition grants, I noted that the tasks need to be addressed in the area of the priority sites. So what are you doing at those priority sites? This is what this is about. Also, having a solid plan, that's important. Next slide, please. This is specific to cleanup plans. Don't just attach the APCA and refer to it, outline the plan. Deficiencies we've seen in past grant debriefings, not enough detail, not sufficient to refer to the APCA. And I think I have a comment from someone from the panel about this too.
Yeah, Dan Cholker here. Just two comments. The first, the APCA is an important piece we talked about yesterday. It's part of the cleanup application, and for the state support letter, you need to provide that as well as any phase 1, phase 2, or other remedial planning documentation. The other comment is this APCA product is something our targeted brownfield assessment program could fund. It's an eligible activity. Unfortunately, I don't know if you're gearing up for a project this year, if we would have enough time to actually complete that for you, but we can have a separate discussion if you're in that situation.
Wow, thank you, Dan. Next slide, please. Now we're getting into project implementation. And just so you know, please, one thing I meant to remind everyone, last year, at least for the coalition grant, the task section, the task descriptions, cost estimates, and measuring progress was worth 50 points. So it's a good place not to blow it. And so you need to plan ahead a bit. Don't do this at the last minute, like probably lots of people have. Be very, start planning now. So deficiencies on project briefings, debriefs have been poor description of the task, lack of milestones, need more detail on contractual tasks, too many tasks, limit to 4 if possible. I really think that's a good idea if you can limit your tasks to 4. But as I mentioned, do now start identifying what your tasks are. Are you going to be doing phase 1s? Are you going to be doing phase 2s? Are you going to be doing remediation? Start planning the details. This is the time to get your numbers. Next slide, please. And I meant to say, I want to back up on no, that's okay. We'll keep going. These are typical eligible tasks. You really don't want to start talking about tasks that aren't eligible, like you can't acquire a piece of property under the grants. There's lots of ineligible tasks. So make sure what you're doing is eligible. So here are some typical eligible tasks. The program management, that's usually your procurement, your reporting, your financial progress meetings. Here's your assessment, another typical approach, inventory, site selection, community engagement. I've seen under both assessment and program management in terms of the community outreach piece, phase 1, phase 2, on and on. Assessment, multi-purpose, developing an area-wide plan. That's good to do. In that particular multi-purpose is developing the plan that's eligible. Cleanup related, cleanup and reuse planning, community engagement, cleanup oversight, site cleanup. So, and for all grant types, local government applicants may use up to 10% of the total grant award for health monitoring, and administrative costs may not exceed 5% of the total award. Next slide, please. Oh, can we go back? Can we go back a slide? Or no, here. I did want, at some point, I did want Carla to talk about this with typical eligible tasks in terms of the the participant cost and the liaison cost as being typical eligible tasks.
Yeah, Beth, thank you. The participant support costs that have been added to as an eligible cost in the assessment grants, both types, and the multipurpose grants, those are things like offering stipends to people that come to your public meetings. It's a way to get people to come out to the public meetings. You can offer things like childcare. How many times, I mean, any of us who've had kids know how hard it is to break away and have to go to a meeting that, you know, a public meeting if we've got our kids. So you could set up daycare, offer daycare during the, you know, during the meeting time. I've put in the chat, I put a link to a PDF that talks about participant support costs and how those, the PDF addresses like how they have to be budgeted. For instance, if it's the grantee who is going to provide the participant support costs, then they would put that under the budget line and item of other and then describe it in their work plan. If it's a sub-grantee, say for instance, you've hired a nonprofit to help you with your community engagement, and that nonprofit is going to be the one setting up the public meeting and reaching out to the community, and they will be incurring those participant support costs, then that nonprofit would, the cost for the participant support costs would end up being under contractual, as a contractual item. So anyway, yeah, take a look at that handout that I put the link in the chat for, and see whether any of these costs are eligible to you.
Yeah, that sounds tricky. And
It could be, but I
Yeah.
think once you get through it once, it's going to be fine.
I bet, and probably with the
Yeah.
help of your project officer and that type of thing.
Yes.
Okay, well, next slide, please. So here's just an example task description. I mean, it could be great or better, but this is the way that they wrote their task description. One thing I do want to point out is item 3, the task activity lead. Be specific. Don't say the city's going to do something and you know, not really say who. It doesn't have to be a person per se, but it could be a title. The city economic development director, or, you know, the small business development coordinator. That would be good. Identifying additional sites. This is a big piece. You probably need to really pay attention to that in the guidelines because they want consistency. If you are identifying your priority sites one way, but then you identify additional sites a different way, EPA will want to know about that. So that's something to keep in mind as you fill out this, fill out the guidelines. Next slide, please. So here are some deficiencies noted in past grant debriefings. Project schedule is vague. You be specific, but it's okay if reality doesn't match later. You change things and you start really looking hard at your work plan, but hopefully you have a very strong plan. Here's an example. Someone put that they put inventory can begin in first quarter and likely continue. That's good. include a specific schedule, be reasonable about early tasks. Like here was an example, they said, well, we're going to put the RFQ for the consultant out the end of the first quarter. But they're also saying the assessments led by the consultant are already occurring. So that isn't logical and it would confuse a reviewer. So to do now, research how long activities take. Draft your schedule. Next slide, please. So here's cost estimates. This is important too. What's the source of the cost? Rationale for the cost, unit cost in the wrong area, not in cost. I will say this is one place where I've fallen down a couple times and I've caught the error myself, but I started having other people that weren't even in the same department necessarily check all my numbers, check my numbers throughout the grant. Like if I say I'm doing 15 phase ones, and then in the budget, I say I'm doing 16, that can be confusing. So double check your numbers. If you include any supply costs, specifically identify the supplies. And I really wanted Dan to kind of chip in on this one on cost estimates and how Ohio EPA can help.
Yeah, we're more than happy to, if you have questions about typical costs for these types of items, we can try to collaborate on that. Just offhand, typically in our program, we typically see $3,000 to $6,000 for a phase one. An ASTM standard is probably the lower end. And then if you add the VAP component to that phase one, they typically run a little bit higher. But note at a minimum, all the phase ones have to meet a minimum the ASTM standard. Then phase twos typically are 10 to 35,000, depending on the size of the property. But then again, if you're looking to qualify the property for our voluntary action program, there's a lot more reporting and information needed. And those phase twos can exceed 30 to even over $100,000, depending on, again, the size of the property, how many sources or areas that need to be evaluated. And then a typical asbestos survey also ranges on building size, but between $2,000 to $10,000. Most building sizes can be assessed. Larger buildings, hospitals, and old manufacturing facilities can get well over that 10,000. Those are some ballpark numbers out there.
Hey, thank you. And you're a great resource, and that will be very helpful for everyone. Next slide, please. Here's just an example of cost estimates. I thought it was pretty well written. How many community education meetings? How many visioning meetings? Development of community outreach plan. The $110 an hour, I believe, was the city rate. Maybe they should explain that. But of course, they're saying who's doing it, so I think that's okay. Contractual cost here includes the VAP. So these are cost estimates that were in a successful grant application. It's a good thing to take a look at how they outlined their cost. Also, with cost estimates, you may find that individual grants have require varying percentage of funds. In other words, they're going to be reviewed more highly. Like, let's say you have a coalition going after a coalition grant, and if it was funding year 23, they were looking for 60% of the funds in your budget to go towards site work, like the phase one, the phase two, the cleanup planning, that type of thing. Could be your remediation if you're going for a cleanup grant. So that's something to be aware of in the grant guidelines. Next slide, please. And this is just an example of an assessment budget. This is a simple one. I like the tasks here. They just kept it to programmatic outreach, inventory, phase 1, cleanup planning. And you can actually expand upon that. I think the area-wide planning is a great idea, or at least some sort of planning. And maybe you put that under cleanup planning if you're doing infrastructure evaluation for your brownfield site. So there's things here. There were no indirect costs incurred. This was in-kind staff time. So that's just an example. Oh, and I didn't ask Carla to do this earlier, but I'm gonna ask her. Sorry, Carla. If you're around,
I'm
can
here.
you explain the direct versus indirect cost?
Oh, direct costs would be like your contractual costs, your direct personnel costs. Indirect costs is there's usually a negotiated amount or negotiated formula between a grantee or a city or a nonprofit and the federal government that dictates what percentage of their personnel plus fringe can be charged as an indirect cost. And those indirect costs can be similar to, I don't know if they work out exactly the same, but they're in the same ballpark then as like what the administrative costs would be. Like administrative costs would be like overhead and that sort of thing. And the indirect costs also cover that.
Yeah, and typically there's pretty good definitions of that in the guidelines and the fact sheets, if I remember.
Mhm. Yeah, look at the best thing to do, a huge source of information for our grants, and if you have any questions, are the FAQs. And every year we update our FAQs. The FY24 FAQs, frequently asked questions, haven't been posted yet. But you can look at the FY23 and probably get answers to 99.9% of your questions. And those are on the grants at the same page as the grant solicitations are posted. So just go to EPA Brownfields .gov and you'll find the grant solicitations. And you can also Google, it's as simple as Googling US EPA Brownfields Grants FAQs, and you'll get a link.
All right, thank you. Okay, well, next slide, please. This is an example of sample cleanup budget, but I think now there might be some additional bells and whistles to the cleanup budget in terms of, I forget, there's contractual and then there's construction. So kind of keep an eye out when if you're applying for a cleanup grant, keep an eye out for what they're requiring in your budget.
Yeah, and Beth, I can comment on that a little bit as
Great.
well. We are with the introduction of the Buy America, Build America, or Build America, Buy America. I just refer to it as BABA Act, as well as the applicability of the Davis-Bacon Act. We used to allow cleanup costs to be put under contractual because you would have a contract with a cleanup contractor. However, EPA is tracking these costs a little bit differently now. And so for cleanup grants and the multi-purpose grants for the cleanup section of the multi-purpose grants, you'll need to put a number, you'll have to create a budget line item for construction. And the activities that are listed under construction or considered construction costs would be like the direct remediation, asbestos remediation, if you're doing demolition because you have to tear down the building because it's unfit and you can't get in and do like the asbestos removal, that would be listed under construction. And what that does is really it's a flag for us so that we can be sure that we make sure that the grantees are in compliance with these other federal crosscutters like BABA and Davis-Bacon.
Oh, great. Thank you. I was also going to mention when particularly if you're cash-strapped town, city, nonprofit, make sure you put budget funds into your personnel, your program management. These grants take your time. Don't think the consultant's going to walk in and take it over, because in the end, if your project blows up, who is the community going to look at? So budget enough time for you to do the work and be involved with the project. And that every time I've seen a budget, because I'm doing grant reviews now for TAB, I see a budget with no personnel in it. I'm thinking, oh, I guess a consultant wrote this one because they're not accounting for the time that you have to put in. Next slide, please.
Oh, Beth,
Yes.
you have a question from the audience. What is under contractual now? And that's
Usually that's QEP cost, your consultant cost for doing work. Oh, gosh. Do you have some thoughts on that? I'm trying to think of what else it could be.
yeah, I know Carla mentioned if you were going to use a liaison for your outreach, that could go under contractual if they're assuming the costs, you know, as a subcontractor.
Yeah.
So things like that.
Carla?
No, you guys covered it. You know, basically construction is actual cleanup. Contractual would be your qualified environmental professional, your oversight contractor, your environmental consultant. Those are all three. I had three ways to say the same kind of thing. And then if you have, if you're hiring, like some of your, say for instance, you're going to hire out your marketing and public, you know, public affairs type work, that would go under contractual because it's not actually remediation. It's not cleanup. It's not boots on the ground, shovel digging kinds of activities.
So Elizabeth with Earth Conservancy is saying engineering design, construction, or contractual.
Engineering design would be under contractual because that would be architectural and engineering type costs, and they would go under contractual as opposed to construction.
Great. Thank you, Carla. I'm so glad you're here.
Oh, they keep changing. They you know, things have been changing the last few years, so it's good.
All right. Next slide, please. Measuring environmental results. Discuss your plan and mechanism to track, measure, and evaluate progress. So this can be, please include, if you have cleanup plans or no further action letters, that's a measure you can track. How will you report? How will you keep your inventory? You know, you should look, if you would like, look at Tab Bit. That's an inventory tool that KSU Tab has developed that helps you track through not just your inventory, but all your reporting, your reports. The other is lack of description of outputs. What about outputs? Need to include outcomes in addition to outputs. Show progress. And also, I think it's very important for EPA project officers to have that information so that they can track as well. How are you doing? Are you doing what you said you were going to do? Next slide, please. And this is just a good example of measuring environmental results. They talk about the outputs to be tracked, number of neighborhood meetings, public meetings. All this is quantified. Cleanup redevelopment plans, and then the outcomes may not happen immediately, and it could, but it may not. Sometimes the outcomes can be the jobs created, the redevelopment dollars leveraged towards your project. So just kind of keep that in mind. And with that, I think I'm wrapping up and passing this on to Amy. Hopefully she has the internet.
Yes, I do. For everybody, I got a message that my internet was unstable, but it seems like it's being stable now. So just wanted Beth and Maggie to know that in case I suddenly disappear, but hopefully not. So anyway, I'm going to talk about the last section, which is of the narrative, which is programmatic capability and past performance. Next slide. So programmatic capability and what EPA wants to know, and Carla, please step in if you want to add anything, but what EPA wants to know with a lot of this section actually is, can you get this grant work done within the grant period, be it 3 or 4 or 5 years? In the past, particularly when these grants were new, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And in some cases, people had difficulty getting all that done within the period of performance. So, you know, a lot of extensions may have had to been given, that sort of thing. And it's kind of led EPA to look at things that really are going to tell them, are you set up to get this grant done within a period of performance? Obviously, they have options if you do not have that. We talked about the coalition grants and leaders taking on cities, townships, whatever, that need to build up their capacity. So just keep this in mind. It's all getting to your capacity. So even though this might not be a high point section, don't slough off on it. So you want to know that they want to know your organization has the capacity to carry out all of the requirements, programmatic and administrative and financial, to successfully manage a brownfield grant project. And they want to know your team structure. And, you know, do you have a well-structured team? Can they do what's needed to be done? In cases of coalitions, they may be closely looking at your MOA, making sure that that's set up right, so everybody has a distinct role and they know what their role is. They want to know the degree of your the folks that are going to be taking the key roles, that they have either they have expertise, perhaps educational expertise, or the amount of time they've spent in a particular role, what their qualifications are, and their experience. Have they worked with other types of grants, maybe brownfield grants, maybe other grants? And I always say, don't forget to discuss the person who will be managing the financial aspects. When I review GET grants, that's probably the one that's left off most often. So don't forget that. They want to know that you have a good financial manager with some expertise and experience doing the numbers for obvious reasons. And again, they want to make sure you have your ducks in a row. If you are acquiring additional resources, describe your procurement process. Carla talked a lot about this on day one, as follows, following the appropriate Code of Federal Regulations 200 and 1500. And there's also fact sheets that have been put on the resources by Carla and maybe Beth that get to the meat of this, to make sure that you are doing a competitive process appropriately. Next slide. So as I have mentioned, you're near the end, but don't treat this as a downhill slide. Put some effort into it. I know you're tired. It gets old. And I like to say, treat it as you would a resume. Make your people, your key staff shine. Make your experience as an organization shine. Look at those things that and highlight those things that really are going to make you look as someone that has some good experience and that can do the job in the period of performance. Next slide. So here we have a fairly good description of organizational capacity and structure. The port will be a grantee the administrator and decision-making body during the 4-year performance period. And they talk about the execution of a cooperative agreement and ensuring compliance with that cooperative agreement with the agency. The port has a proven track record of successfully managing federal and state grant and loan programs. They may want to put which ones they are down, but they will get into that. You will find details often in the in later sections, subsections as well. And talking about that they have the technical, administrative, and accounting capabilities for successful grant management. Next slide. So description of key staff. Amber Martin. What I like about this, she's going to be the Brownfield Project Director, is what they put in highlight below that. Even though she's only been in the city 5 months, she has years of grant and project management experience during her time at the United Way of Greater Lima. And we all know United Ways work a lot with not only issuing, but managing grants. So, that's a good way of, like I said, letting yourself shine. Even though a person may only be there a short period of time, they have a lot of experience in this area of, whatever they're doing. And talk a bit about the grant system specialist, who's going to be the Brownfield project manager, and 10 years experience in different areas of accounting and finance, even though she's only been there 18 months. And the finance director has 15 years. He's been with the city 15 years and manages city budgets, which have been up to 200 million. So those sorts of things. You can also put in degrees. So if they've got, a degree in accounting or financial management and that sort of thing, highlight that too, just like a resume. Whatever you can fit in, without taking up too much space in your 10-page or 12-page limit. Next slide. So acquiring additional resources. The key is that you're going to comply with and often they will say local contracting and procurement process. And they'll say that's more, in some cases, it's more restrictive than 200 and 1500 of 2 CFR. But you do want to put that you are going to follow 2 CFR 200 and 1500. You want to make sure that you are stating. And Beth, do you want to?
I just wanted to mention that Carla had added the federal procurement guidelines for brownfields. That's one of our resource items. Take a close look at that.
Yes.
You may want to change some of your wording on your procurement.
Yeah. Yes, there is some new procurement guidelines. So if mine at all are older, please take a look, as Beth mentioned, and go by Carla's and what it says in the grant guidelines when they come out for FY24 in the fall. Just make sure that you're stating that you're going to meet those. You want to make it clear to the reviewers that you're going to meet those requirements. Next slide. And past performance. Again, I've got a couple of examples. One has not received an EPA grant, but has received other federal or non-federal assistance agreements. And the point values given to these vary depending on whether you've had experience with a brownfield grant, whether you've had experience with other grants, whether you've had no experience. And they can, my best advice to you, and what I like about this example, is that even though they don't have EPA brownfield grant experience, they do have experience with CDBG funds, and a lot of communities do this. So don't forget things like that. So you can highlight your experience with any type of grant so that they know you have management experience. It can make a difference in the point values. Beth, you're,
Yeah, Amy, we do have a question, and it
oh, okay.
might be something that Carla might have a great answer to.
Oh, okay.
The question is, so if you are a small nonprofit with limited resources, would you recommend having a fiscal agent such as a community foundation and hiring a project manager? I'm not exactly sure how that all goes together, but.
Yeah.
I
Carl?
can't, I can't really comment on or make recommendations on how you should structure your grant, because it's really all a matter of how you present it in your grant application. However, I can say that, if there's a need within your organization for a fiscal officer, you can do what you'd be considered like a pass-through. You can hire or partner with another organization that's like an eligible entity, like a city or another nonprofit, to have them manage the financial side of your grant application, or not the application, but of your grant once you get the grant.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Carla. And
Sure.
that's a really good recommendation. I know you've talked about that before. So
Does
Beth,
that answer the question though?
I think so, because I think they're looking at maybe whether they need to hire or, and it could be that they need, oh, they do say yes.
Okay, great. Great.
So,
Yeah,
Michelle Merritt, by
I-
the way. Yeah, Michelle Merritt asked that question, so that you gave her an excellent answer. Thank
Okay,
you,
thank
Carla.
Sure, no worries.
Okay. Also, one thing I like with this is HUD. They mentioned that HUD, who obviously oversees and administers CDBG funds, regularly audits Lima on the use of these funds. And the state also audits them. So it gives you an idea that they are being audited and they're doing a good job, or they wouldn't be given them on a regular basis. It also just indicate that past cooperative agreements have been handled properly. You may want to show some highlights of compliance with grant requirements. That would be the only thing I'd add here, just to make it look like, yes, not only were we handling the funds correctly, we did a really good job and have some successes. Next slide. And this is one as far as past performance having received a brownfield grant in the past. And oftentimes these are larger cities that have maybe managed more than one in the past. And you'll see that they refer to the city, a cleanup grant of $200,000 that successfully remediated a 0.9 acre site. A cleanup grant that successfully remediated a 0.65 acre site for a land bank owned property. And the former cleanup grant, they talk about how it was integral to retaining a important industry along the river. And obviously that includes jobs, tax base, that sort of thing. And so under compliance, they've mentioned, complying with all their schedules, requirements, and deliverables. So, like I said, in situations like this, either in the compliance or in the accomplishments, I've seen them talk about the successful things that have been done, like retaining a good industry. So don't hesitate to put that in there if you have that information. Makes you shine better. Next slide. So you're not alone. As Beth mentioned, it does seem quite daunting, and there is some help. Next slide. And you can have help from KSU TAB, who along with a couple of other regions is assisting, has an assistant grant to assist communities in Region 5. So we're around. You've heard a little bit of what we can do. Next slide. Along with having tab EZ, we offer reviews. We've mentioned this a few times, Beth and I, reviewing your EPA assessment grants prior to submittal to the EPA. Take advantage of a second set of eyes. Get your proposals drafts in usually 2 weeks before the due date. Sometimes we can do them quick, 1 week, but 2 weeks is a good rule of thumb. And Beth, do you have is there another question?
I've got a comment on that, on the tab. Tab can actually, we can help you with grant strategy too. If you have questions, you're leaning one way or another on a certain grant, or maybe you're not quite sure how to approach, let's say, neighborhoods with community outreach, we can help you with that planning piece. There's lots of ways we can do that way before you have a draft grant to look at. And also, I did want to make a statement. We haven't pushed this enough, but the national conference that's going to be held in Detroit from August 7th, 8th through the 11th, I believe. That's a great way to start talking to EPA Region 5 about your project. What's going on with your project? Maybe they have some solutions and they can talk about these things now, where maybe once the guidelines are out, they really can't, except for threshold. So this is an important piece. Start hobnobbing, and it doesn't matter whether you have experience or not. They want to hear from you and they want to know about what's going on in your community. So with that, sorry.
No, great. I'm glad you mentioned that. That is a wonderful service as well. So don't hesitate to ask if you are trying in this early stage where you're coming up with your strategy, if you want to talk with one of us to help you refine it or answer questions. And I do believe either Dan or Jenny had a comment on this particular slide as well.
Yes, this is Jenny. I just wanted to state that the KSU TAB team provides extremely helpful strategy assistance and reviews of the draft applications. I've used them on most applications in the past, working closely with our clients, and would have for every application since they've been around if I'd been involved earlier in the process and time allowed. Fresh eyes on an application from people that know the program inside and out have always proved to be beneficial. So build in time in the application preparation schedule to allow for these TAB reviews. And I don't know how the TAB team does it with the crunch of work sent to them in the last 2 weeks before the application deadline. They're just amazing. But I'm sure they would appreciate that if they had the opportunity to review those drafts earlier than those last 2 weeks. I think they would really love it and build that into their schedules as well. Just please absolutely make sure that the application preparation team does involve TAB. It can only help, and the points likely gained because of their input could help make the difference on whether the application is funded. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny, because you also reminded me that this is not a bad time. If you applied for a grant last year and it wasn't successful, we'll take a look at it and give you some ideas too on how to improve your grant application. Now, we all know the guidelines are going to change, but they're not going to change that much. So it might give you, like you said, another set of eyes looking at it, what's working, what's not. Hopefully you've had a debrief with the EPA if you weren't successful. So that's just an FYI out there if you'd like us to look at those early too.
Yes, and we have done those, and those have been helpful. I may have whipped past one of the slides. I think Dan may have wanted to comment in. I apologize, Dan. Do you want to still comment?
I can, yeah, I was going to just share a brief success story.
Absolutely.
Kind of words of encouragement. So a few years ago, Richland County Land Bank had no experience with brownfields. They have 2 full-time employees and 2 part-time employees, and they wanted to start looking at more of their commercial properties. So they got their feet wet with our targeted brownfield assessment program at an old gas station site. They were able to clean that up. And then they decided to take on this dry cleaner property, which in turned out was significantly impacted and it needed cleanup. And the nice thing about their organization, they do have fiscal and administrative capacity because they do a lot of residential home demolitions for light reduction. So they decided to go after a US EPA cleanup grant. This was a couple of years ago. And they put their team together, KSU TAB, Ohio EPA, their environmental consultant. They had a interested party in the property, so they were able to put all their pieces together, and in their first attempt, they were successfully awarded, I think it was about a $500,000 grant. So yeah, different capacity, as long as you have it, doesn't real size of your organization, if it's there, you can take advantage of that. And the other lesson too is maybe it's a good to reach out to some of the successful applicants in the past and kind of tease ideas from them or learn from their success.
Great advice, Dan, and I'm glad I remembered I forgot you, because the really good things. Not only as TAB can we help with strategy, but reaching out to other successful applicants. Take a look at, and they'll only be here till the 31st of August. The applications, both successful and not, from FY23. It's on the EPA Brownfields page. And also, if you know of other successful applicants, talking with them can often provide a lot of information and insight too. So there's a number of different ways you can gather and get help. So take advantage of them all if you need. Next slide. So just want to thank you, Beth and I, on both our behalfs for listening to the last two sections of the narrative. Hopefully they've been helpful for you. And again, please contact us with any questions. I'm going to move on to the next slide since it involves the group exercise. Next slide, please. It's pretty much, if you were here yesterday on the webinar yesterday, it's pretty much the same instructions. You'll be assigned to a working group, and each group will be put in a separate Zoom room. You'll have a facilitator. That might be Beth or I or Dan or Lisa. And each working group will review section 3. So since section 3 kind of has more meat to it, it's a little more can be problematic, and you need to watch a lot of things. We wanted people to really have an experience with that. And hopefully what you've seen in section 4 knows how to write a good resume and make your organization shine. So just remember to do it. Assigning a lead from your working group, your facilitator will probably encourage you to do that. And make sure you have a lead that will do the report out. Review the narrative ranking criteria for section 3. You want to look at both section 4 and section 5 of the community-wide assessment guidelines that were under the resource tab. Hopefully you had a chance to print those out. We also have the language on slides if the facilitators want to share their screen during that. So you'll be reviewing those and considering how well a grantee does tying their story together in their narrative. Next slide. So again, as I mentioned, you'll have the guidelines, community-wide assessment guidelines, and the resources. We'll be looking at sections 4 and section 5. Depending on what facilitator you're assigned, you'll either be looking at the City of Cleveland Community-Wide Assessment Grant or the City of Lima Community-Wide Assessment Grant. Those are both in the resources as well. Next slide. So the narratives, things we've been telling you as we've been going along these webinars, be clear, be concise, be factual, and answer all criteria and sub-criteria. Never leave them blank. If they don't apply, be clear about that. Did the applicant provide sufficient detail to allow for an evaluation of the merits of this proposal? Detail is important. Did they provide data from the census, EJ Screen, CGEST, other data sources? You want that. You don't want generalities. You don't want to say a lot of, over half, rather than giving a percentage of, people in poverty in your target area, for example. Did they provide a response to all information requested under the criterion? Make sure the applicant has used sample format tables. If they don't use the tables, which is not required, just make sure that they have included all the information in those sample tables. Consistency, as we mentioned before, it's paramount. It's really important. Don't be talking about certain priority sites and certain target areas and then talk about some other area of your geographic area or city or whatever in another section or paragraph. You need to be consistent. You need to be talking about those things all the way through from section 1 on. Next slide. Are we done? I think we might done. Oh yeah. So while we're Maggie's got the feedback, again, we can't emphasize enough. Please give us feedback. Here's the link. Here's the QR code. We'll put this up a few more times before the day is over. But right now she is going to be putting you into groups, and then we'll get started on our group exercise.
Are you guys there still? Uh-oh.
Oh,
We're
there
here,
we go.
Carla. We're
Oh,
just
there we
getting
go.
pushed back into the main room.
Oh, is that what? Okay, but anyway, I just wanted to let you guys know that. And I'm not saying you shouldn't take a point off. Go ahead and take a point off. But that's not one of the things that'll be critical. You know, what we'll look at is how much money you're putting into assessments. And you won't be held to your budget. That's another thing. We know these are all just guesses.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, looks like everybody is back. So we're going to do group reports, and hopefully you all selected a lead that so folks can discuss why they gave the points that they did, maybe why they took points off. So basically what they did well and what they could do better to their proposal. Maggie, can I share my screen? I again put the points on a slide. Okay, can folks see this?
Yes.
Okay. We had Jessica. Are you there as our I kind of volunteered her, but she lovely and thankfully agreed to be our report out leader.
Sure. So we looked at the Cleveland grant application, and mostly we gave them full points in all areas, and we have some reasons why. In the project implementation, they had a lot of detail that was specific to the tasks that they were describing, including, numbers and talking about the outputs. Also, we had a wondering, and Carla answered it for us, and that was if, say, in the community outreach, if they're not doing something like using a stipend for community outreach, should they mention it? And Carla said, basically, when you're writing to these task implementations, write to the question. So if the question specifically said, in the guidance said, are you using stipends, then you would say yes or no. But if it doesn't mention it, you don't need to do that. There was one exception to that, which I'll get to in a minute. Oh, and that is when you're talking about tracking your progress for your task. If you just say, we'll have the QEP do that, or we'll have the QEP do that with city oversight, that's good. And you want to always mention that you've got oversight from the grant applicant, but you also, a way to get extra points and full points on one of those would be to say that you're using a spreadsheet of some kind of a program or Microsoft Project Manager to track the progress, in addition to talking about, quarterly meetings and check-ins. So that was kind of a good lesson learned. Another thing that they did well was when they were talking about the assessment for the site, they mentioned the number of sampling plans and HASPs, talked about them being site specific. So we gave them full points for that. Also in their reuse planning, they talked about planning for reuse with the redevelopment uses in mind. So they were connecting the ends to the middle part. And then they also mentioned that they were going to have ABCAs, I'm not going to know what that means, but analysis of brownfield cleanup alternatives, because if they apply for another EPA grant for cleanup, they're going to need to have ABCAs. We also felt like their costs were appropriate. And then the only ding we gave them was on measuring environmental results. We gave them a 4 out of 5 points because they didn't mention using some kind of tracking system.
Yeah, thank you so much
Thank you.
for giving that nice report out, Jessica.
You bet.
And I will stop sharing this and go to Beth to let us know who their person is that's reporting out. Beth, you're still on mute if you didn't know that.
Self-laugh. But anyway, I was just thinking the team members that we had, they were very critical. And so I'm glad they don't work for the EPA. But Jenny is our spokesperson, so I'll let her go with it.
Great. Yeah, I do feel bad because I felt like I was being ultra critical, but sometimes we get ultra critical reviewers. So I thought we could point out a few things that maybe could help save somebody a point or two. But obviously this was funded, so it was fine. But we did look at the Lima application. I think I'm sharing my screen. Are you seeing the criteria where I plugged in our totals?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So I think this is 42 out of 50. We're doing some quick adding, and I think the total's 50 of the section. So overall, for like the project implementation, they hit the high points. You know, there were some, you know, nitpicky things that we all kind of noticed and would have maybe suggested for improvement. And maybe even like switching the order so it's a little more sequential. You know, mentioning that they would be seeking input rather than just informing the public and some things like that. But overall, it was fine. Identifying the additional sites, they really didn't hit that as thoroughly as we would have liked. They could have talked a little bit more about the process and maybe some of the criteria that might be considered as they're looking at that, recognizing that they did say that they would be seeking input from the community on how they would, you know, evaluate and rank the sites that were added to their inventory. So they kind of brushed on it, but we thought they could have been a little more thorough. The project schedule, you know, they overall, they laid out a lot of things that seemed realistic. They did miss some of the items that were named in the implementation that they didn't carry over into the schedule. So they got dinged a little bit from our team on that. And the task activity leads, they named the people. In fact, they named them by name, which, you know, was interesting. So I think that's a good thing. They didn't always talk about oversight, or, you know, there were a little bit of inconsistencies there. And then they maybe didn't break out some of those things as much as they could have, but overall that was fine. The outputs, we all thought they did a good job, you know, listing the numbers and the activities that they plan to complete. The cost estimates, so we kind of ran out of time because we spent so much time on the first section. So we very quickly, you know, assigned some points and some overall input. So our team came to the consensus of 13 out of 15 points for cost. Although, you know, there just were a few things that we had time to talk about. We did note that they didn't mention that their personnel time would be in kind, which we thought might be important. And I think that just generally it seemed okay. Our team noted that they really liked how they broke everything out in the narrative that was summed up in the table. So they did follow the instructions. And then measuring environmental results, we gave them a 4 out of 5. Overall, I think it seemed fine. Beth, you had some thoughts on this, and I didn't jot them down, so I apologize. But I think it might have been a little bit more on the tracking and maybe some things that were labeled as outcomes instead of outputs instead of outcomes with the timing of some of the activities. Beth, did I summarize that okay?
Yeah, it was basically the community participation they had should have been during the grant project rather than thinking it's an outcome for later, although they can keep tracking that. But it's really good to track it while you're implementing the grant.
Great. So we had a wonderful team and everybody chimed in and provided really good feedback. So thanks, everyone.
Wonderful. Yeah, and when you mentioned in kind, I understand, because I know I was saying during when I was facilitating my group, that's something I like to see, is make sure that they're very clear, so you know what services they are going to be providing, basically free of charge, how they're going to be leveraging themselves this grant. Next, I believe we have Lisa's group. So if you want to let me know who the lead is, that'd be great.
Chelsea is our lead today.
Okay, Chelsea.
Thanks.
Hello. So yeah, we had the city of Cleveland as well. Kind of hearing Jessica and what their group went over, kind of similar to their thoughts on some things. Our scoring was a little bit different on the 3AI. I believe we had an 8 out of 10, but after hearing some of the other groups talk, maybe we would rank it a little bit higher. But I think the main talking points we had on that was to do with the schedule. They talked about timelines on a quarterly basis, over a 4-year period. In our minds, we thought that maybe was a little generic, but maybe that's something that's just applicable to this stage of the application. And then the next section, I believe we had a 15 out of 15 on that. So we thought that they checked all the boxes with their task lists. They did discuss that they were going to have a lot of outreach meetings. I believe Lisa had mentioned in a different section, they had talked about going as far as attending book club meetings. So we thought, they were kind of going above and beyond maybe, but all things good. And then the last section, I don't believe we gave a final score when it came to costs. I know there were a couple comments where we thought maybe they didn't estimate certain environmental assessments correctly. With like phase 2 site assessments, they might have been on the lower end, but that might all kind of wash out in the end. So I don't know if anyone in our group wants to shout out a number for that, but I'd say overall, we thought City of Cleveland did a good job.
Great. Wonderful report out. Thank you. And I think our last group is Dan's.
Yes, we had Lima, and Richard will report out.
Great.
Thanks, Dan. We had Lima, and we were a little more kind in the scoring. Mostly if they met the criteria, even if it was very basic, we were kind and gave them full points. But just starting off with the project implementation, they did provide the whole story and life cycle of brownfield, so we awarded full 10 points for that. And then continuing on to identifying additional areas. They did have that marked out, and they said they will expand into the city area when they're doing their brownfield inventory for if they discover any additional sites. So we gave them full points there. And on the third, for anticipated project schedule, we actually, Dan pointed this out, that the way they formatted it is tracking quarterly, which follows in parallel with reporting to acres, which helps them keep in line with their actual updating on their information for the brownfield project. So full points for that. And then continuing on for the task and activity lead, we thought that was great. They had the names, their titles, and the title was relative to the job assigned. So even if they have no experience with this particular grant process, they at least have some foundation to how to manage their duties assigned. So full points for that. Output, it was detailed and measurable, and it did show like a specific path, so full points for that. And then we go into the cost. As previously mentioned, We wish they were more clearly on the in-kind. So that was the one area we did dock 1 point. And then for the results, we do wish they connected more to their narrative, but they did answer the question. They mentioned the acres, dollars leveraged, and jobs created. But again, they didn't really connect to their narrative as much as we would have liked. So we only gave them 4 points for that. So a total of 48 out of 50.
Great. Thanks to all those, and I guess I should say that was all of the groups, correct, Maggie? I didn't miss anybody, did I?
No, I believe you got it all.
Okay, so we did have 4 groups like yesterday. Great, great. Anyway, wonderful, wonderful report outs. Thank you guys for agreeing to do that. And I guess we can move on to my final presentation thing. Yeah. Yes, so going to give a final presentation on writing a successful grant proposal. And some of the things you'll hear are probably things you may have heard through the last 2 webinars. One of the important things, or probably one of the most important things, and something you can do right now, is set the stage. You know what now is required in these. Things may change slightly for the FY24 guidelines, but usually not a lot. And certainly some of the main elements are going to be in there year after year. So, you know, make sure that you've got a good handle on your history and challenges for your city, for your geographic area. Within your geographic area, something I did not mention, since that has changed, because the geographic area, as Beth mentioned, can be an entire city or county or whatever, but the target area or areas that you are choosing, you know, be careful about those. Keep in mind some of the items we talked about as in respect to things like if it doesn't have a small population or a low income, you might lose some points. So when you're looking at your target areas, look at them with respect to need. As we've mentioned, EJ can help with that, the EJ screen, the CGES tools. So, you know, come up with your plan for what your area or areas of real need for brownfield redevelopment and populations that need that, keep those in mind. And then think about your assessment and cleanup activities. Depending on what type of grant you go for, you maybe just be looking at cleanup or just assessment, but maybe some planning, maybe some cleanup plans and things like that. Or maybe you're looking at all of it if you're doing a multi-purpose grant. So keep those things in mind. That'll, you know, not only help you kind of get a vision of what you're going to be doing when you actually start the work, the assessment type work or cleanup type work, but also will help you in identifying what grant might be best for you. And then you're going to go to positive impacts and reduction of identified threats. So you want to be concentrating on whatever you're going to be doing that leads to these assessments or cleanups, that they lead to positive impacts. In the case of cleanup grants, you're going to want to know that you have an identified end use. For assessment grants, you want to know that you've got a really strong idea of what your end use is going to be and how it's going to have positive impacts on the population in the target area, not just in reducing threats from contamination, but also maybe helping on employment, tax base, those sorts of things. Next slide. So here's an example. In this particular area, be it geographic or target, you've got a lack of business opportunities, job loss, and a failed industrial legacy. which is common in our Great Lakes states. Certainly Ohio is one of them, where we lost a lot of heavy industry. So talking about that, and then you get into, particularly in section 2, where the health and environmental impacts have resulted, what has resulted as a result of the job loss, poor economy, contamination, many EJ, as you can be thinking, type situations. People that are in these areas have not only lost jobs, but they're often subjected to a greater contamination exposure. And then you want to choose a site that speaks to these issues and problems. So an abandoned manufacturing site that may have put out a lot of pollutants and is shuttered because of the failed industrial legacy is chosen as a priority site. And then cleanup and redevelopment of that site into a business incubator will save the economy and
Hey, Amy, are you still there? Okay. All right, well, let's go to the next
improve
slide.
health and
Oh,
welfare
there
of
you
the
are. There you are. We could.
Oh, okay. Was I going in and out? I got another indication. My
Yes, but go
okay.
ahead. We've got you.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next slide. So as you're putting your grant together, here's some pitfalls that you want to avoid. And the one is waiting until the guidelines come out to start writing your grant or planning your grant project. As Carla and Beth and I and others have mentioned, there will be differences in the FY24 guidelines, just as they are every year. But the premise and the steps and the parts of the narrative of the grant are going to essentially remain the same as far as what we're looking for and what they want to get out of this grant. So you can start that planning right now using the FY23 guidelines. You don't want to select too many priority areas. It just, it waters down the application. I think it might take up more space describing all of those. And you run the risk that they're not as well related to each other as they might be if you select too many of them. Perhaps one of them might really reduce contaminants, but might not result in either a green space or a lot, a good amount of jobs, things like that. It just isn't addressing what the problems of the target areas are. So, keep it to 2 or 3. And I'm talking more assessment grant there. Selecting too many priority projects that are unrelated. Again, that gets into the fact that we want our priority projects, our priority sites, our target areas to be related as far as what they are experiencing, be it job loss, be it high unemployment, or both, different types of health risks. You want to have those types of things related so it all meshes well in the grant. And I kind of mentioned this before, don't use a priority project or a cleanup that doesn't address the impacted populations and the health statistics. We talked a lot about health statistics and when we went over section 2 of the grant, also was covered a lot in what Lucy was talking about, touched on that quite a bit. You want to make sure that these are things that are going to address those problems. Writing too much up front and not saving enough for other areas where the points are usually lost. So keep that in mind. And even if you do write too much up front, don't hesitate to, cut that down a bit. And you can always check in with us as, for strategy and things like that. successful grantees if you run into problems like that. But don't be afraid to edit if need be. And this is one of my big ones. And Carla kind of backed me up on this. I was glad to hear her say this because I really don't want you to ignore section 5. This contains the questions, so to speak, that the reviewers such as Carla and her colleagues use when they are scoring. So you do not want to, you want to write your grant and you want to look at it with respect to section 5 to make sure you're going to get as many points as possible. And also one of the things I've noted is sometimes when they talk about only, getting 2 to 5 points or not, or projects being viewed more favorably if they mention certain things, that it often is only in section 5. So please take a look at that. It can make a big difference. A non-cohesive story, we've talked about that. You don't want to start talking about certain problems in the history of your city or municipal area and then have it not relate to your target areas and priority projects and sites. We've mentioned this before. Just remember, no incomplete responses. If it doesn't apply to you, say it in the grant. Next slide. I am getting an unstable internet, so hopefully I don't go in and out. Let me know. Check out we do have under our resources, the information resources for brownfield grant writers. It's under the resource tab, has a lot of good sites, including census sites, CDC sites, things like that, that will give you a lot of information that can complement what you can pull out of EJ Screen and CGEST. There's state and local health departments. I mentioned, and it's also mentioned in the that information source, the State of Ohio Health Department. I think they have a really good website. I've used this in the past. Gives a lot of good information. Dialing that down or drilling it down to the local level, sometimes it's hard with health data, but local hospitals also often have community health assessments or CHAs. And these, if you contact your local hospital, you may be able to find out if some of this research has been done, and it may drill down to, your neighborhood target area, geographic area that will be helpful when you write your grant. TIF districts, they look at a lot of information about blight and devaluation of properties. Because that is needed in developing how they, fix the cost for certain sites and TIF districts. So that's another good resource. Community action agency reports. This has a lot of information. Beth, do you want to say anything about this? I know you mentioned it, and I've just really looked at it. And I know it's got a lot of agencies that, may help underprivileged, youth or adults or a number of different things, and may have some data.
Yes, they sometimes they do something to really look at in your area. They do typically a needs assessment where they might identify populations, that need additional resources, and that could be the elderly, that could be the very young. I think they're great reports to take a look at and get a feel for if you get a chance.
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, I just briefly looked at it, but was a resource I hadn't been aware of, and it does look really good. So, it's worth your time to check it out, see if there might be something helpful for your grant writing. Another thing I wasn't aware of that Beth mentioned were transportation and planning departments in your area, your municipality. They sometimes have an inventory of sidewalk existence and the condition and ADA compliance. So that can be helpful depending on what your concerns are in your target areas. And also Parks and Recs have a park inventory that identifies which neighborhoods are underserved with access to green space. So especially if you're looking at redeveloping a site for green space, this would be an excellent resource to have. So don't forget about that and contacting your local Parks and Rec department. Next slide. Beth went over, did a nice demonstration of Tab EZ and how to get in and start working with it. Don't forget that that tool is available to you. The Tab website, KSU Tab website, also has examples of past successful grants under their resources and Tab EZ. And as we've mentioned before, don't forget our review of draft grant applications. Next slide. So the draft application review, basically, we review them and provide comments where you might be able to improve and possibly get more points or avoid losing points. You schedule, it's good to schedule them in advance. Maggie it kind of coordinates all of that when the time comes around. Typically a 3 to 5 day turnaround. Even if you have a consultant that's helping you write a grant, it is an extra set of eyes, because I have had consultants, I do some of the reviews, and I've had consultants that have asked for reviews themselves on behalf of their client many times. And as Beth mentioned, if time permits, second review after you've looked at the comments and possibly made some changes is also something that can be accommodated if possible. Next slide. So next steps and key milestones. So where do you go from here when you leave? Identify the right funding for you. We've got different MARC grants, or in this case, MAC grants. You make sure that you've identified your person, I always forget what AOR, but the person of record that is needs to, file your application. Make sure you've got your SAM information in order. And get familiar with grants.gov. It sometimes, is not as easy to work through for some people. And it's good to get an early sense for your AOR, how easy that's going to be, especially if they haven't done any filings in a while. And again, SAM and UEI identifiers need to make sure those are current and assigned. You want to start identifying and engaging your partners. So, people you think that are going to provide some good assistance and help that will fulfill the partner requirements in Section 2 of the grant. Start working with them now, not later. And read last year's guidelines. Actually, that should say FY 2022 FY 23. So sorry about that, but look at past successful applications that are online at KSU Tab, as well as last year's grants, both successful and unsuccessful, on the EPA Brownfields site page. And if you, after that, don't think that this might be, you're not quite ready for a grant, this might not be for you, talk to Lisa and Dan and Roxanne about their TBA program. Or if there is also, Roxanne and Dan and Lisa can also point you to US EPA, because they do some of the TBA work as well. And Brad Stimple, who works with Carla, is the contact there. And there's a link to their application for TBAs. So if you are going assessment grant funding, make sure you, right now you can start determining your coalition if you're going for a coalition grant. Build real relationships, start working on that MOA. That's very important. EPA is going to want to know that you have a good MOA and you've identified clearly who is going to be doing what with this grant. And as we mentioned before, identify priority sites, have a reuse plan for some of those sites, and start engaging the public. Having a meeting right now would not be a bad idea if you really know that you're going to go for a grant. The sooner the better. Next slide. So for multipurpose, start looking at applicant eligibility. This can often be kind of confusing and tough. And each region, as we've mentioned before, does have a grant contact, a MARC contact that can help you with this. Usually it is done by their legal staff, but you want to make sure that you are eligible, or the site that you're going to put forward is eligible. And you also need to make sure that you own the site or will own the site by the time the application is due. That is definitely a requirement you don't want to miss. And determining a target area, one target area that includes that cleanup site. And it can be anything from a neighborhood to a corridor, shared planning area, so on and so forth. And describe the steps for redevelopment of that site. When they're cleaned up or you're asking for cleanup money, you want to make sure that you have an identified end use in mind and planned out for. Cleanup grant funding, same thing with applicant and eligibility, site eligibility, ensuring that you have a full phase 2. And we talked about that and getting the letter from Lisa and her staff as part of that, so that the EPA does know that you've had done enough assessment to know what the cleanup is going to entail and can budget appropriately for it. So you want to have a solid reuse plan. And I don't mean solid waste. I mean solid as in, you know exactly what that site's going to be reused for. You've already talked to potential developers, folks like that. That's what EPA wants to see, that you have an identified reuse and that it is going to connect to what the issues are in your target area. And start drafting your ABCA. That link is for an EPA site that gives an example ABCA, and it might be cut off. So I don't know if somebody can put that in the chat, that might be helpful. Next slide. So anyway, thank you for being part of our webinar today and possibly yesterday. We really enjoyed having you. I think we had a lot of good discussion, really great group exercises, a lot of good input. So we all thank you for your participation. As final housekeeping, as I mentioned before, you'll get a certificate of attendance. So if the name that is on your Zoom, if you came in by Zoom, is not your name, make sure that you email chsr@ksu.edu with your actual name to get that certificate. Or if you've joined by phone only. The recording will be loaded in about a week of this particular webinar. And of course, tell us how we did, how we can improve, what you might want to hear about in the future on our survey. These are very important to us. Next slide. And again, if we haven't said it enough, and if you aren't tired of hearing it enough, we really want to hear your feedback. We do look carefully at these evaluations, especially when we're planning next year's webinars and trainings and things like that. So please do give us your information. And here's all the emails and phone numbers for folks that have presented today. Please feel free to contact us. Hopefully by now you know what each of us is kind of specialized or knows about or can help out with. And if you don't, I'm sure one of us can get to the other person or somebody that can help you. And again, just want to say at the end of this, thanks especially to Carla Ocker and Lucy Stanfield, who did wonderful presentations and really provided a lot of help to us and a lot of good, useful, very valuable information in this webinar. To our EPA folks, Lisa Shook and Dan Jolker and Roxanne, who did a lot of work ahead of time and unfortunately wasn't able to be on this because of an illness. So I want to thank all of them, along with panel members Jenny Cardinal-Cornell and Kim Kimlin, who was a panel member yesterday. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for all your contributions. And finally, Sherry Walsh and Maggie Bellinger. Thank you, and especially thank you, Maggie, for doing all this, getting us in the right rooms for the group exercises. I know it wasn't the easiest task in the world, and it's not your main task, so we really appreciate that. I don't think we have any other slides. Anybody else need to want to say anything from the group? If not, have a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you again for your participation. And hopefully you've gotten some valuable things out of it. Take care.
Thank you.